I didn't realize how much I was editing myself until I spent an entire day saying almost nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, but because every thought came with calculation. Would this start a discussion? Would it turn into another lesson about my tone or intent? We've been married for 11 years, and I thought that level of restraint meant respect. I didn't see that it meant fear. Quiet, reasonable fear of being misunderstood on purpose. She liked to describe herself as emotionally aware, grounded, if I disagreed with her. She'd stay calm and ask me to unpack why I felt the way I did. The unpacking never ended. By the time we reached the core, the original issue no longer mattered. What mattered was my reaction. She never denied things outright. She reframed them until I wasn't sure what I was reacting to anymore. I started trusting her version of events more than my own because it sounded cleaner, more mature. The first sign wasn't behavior. It was how often she corrected my interpretation of it. That's not what I meant. You're adding emotion that wasn't there. She said it gently, often with a smile. Over time, I began second-guessing myself before finishing sentences. I'd pause mid-thought, waiting for a response before deciding whether what I felt made sense. That should have alarmed me. Instead, I told myself this was what healthy communication looked like. I found out about the affair in a way that almost felt intentional. Like the truth got tired of waiting. We shared a streaming account, and one night, I noticed a profile I didn't recognize. Different viewing habits, different schedule. When I asked about it, she laughed and said I was being paranoid. Later that night, curiosity wouldn't let go. I checked the login history. Same location. Same night she said she was clearing her head. My stomach dropped, but I still hoped I was wrong. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She sighed and said she wished I had trusted her enough not to look. She said the relationship wasn't about sex. It was about being understood. She said she felt emotionally alone for a long time. My hurt became evidence of her loneliness. The more upset I got, the calmer she became. By the end of the conversation, I was apologizing for how I'd approached it. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a system where I was always the one adjusting. The days after that felt deliberately quiet. She was careful with her words, gentle in a way that felt rehearsed. When I tried to talk about what I'd found, she'd say, we were already past that moment, and that revisiting it showed I wasn't committed to growth. She suggested therapy, books, podcasts, all framed around emotional regulation. Nothing about accountability. I started noticing how often the focus shifted from what she did to how I processed it. My pain wasn't something to be addressed. It was something to be managed. The first real twist came when I realized she'd already explained everything to other people. A mutual friend asked me if I was handling things better now. That phrasing stopped me cold. Later, I learned she'd told him I'd been struggling emotionally for years and that she was trying to support me through a difficult phase. It wasn't entirely false, but it was carefully edited. Any reaction I had now didn't look like betrayal. It looked like instability. I felt like I'd walked into a version of events where I was already the problem. I asked if she was still seeing it. She said yes, but only because cutting him off abruptly would be emotionally irresponsible. When I said that crossed a boundary, she accused me of being controlling. She said trust couldn't grow under ultimatums. I remember sitting there, stunned by how easy my need for safety became a character flaw. I started wondering how many of my boundaries had been quietly dismissed this way over the years, reframed as immaturity instead of self-respect. Another twist surfaced quietly. I noticed she'd started documenting our conversations. Notes on her phone. Dates. Key phrases. When I disagreed with a memory of something she'd said, she'd confidently quote me back, slightly altered. I began doubting my own recollection. I started writing things down too. Not to win arguments, but to stay grounded. That scared me more than the affair itself. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was afraid of losing my sense of reality. The moment I stopped explaining myself, everything changed. Her calm cracked into irritation. She accused me of shutting down, of being emotionally unavailable. The same behavior she once praised as thoughtful was suddenly framed as cold and punitive. Watching that switch flip was clarifying. It showed me the rules had never been about communication or growth. They were about predictability. As long as I stayed manageable, everything stayed calm. The moment I wasn't, the calm disappeared. Leaving didn't come with a clear moment of certainty. It came with a slow, heavy understanding that nothing I did would ever be enough. I realized I was spending more time monitoring myself than living my life. When I told her I needed space, she said I was avoiding responsibility. That real growth meant staying and working through discomfort. I didn't argue. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend. That first night was unsettlingly quiet. No explanations to prepare. No emotions to justify. My thoughts felt unpoliced for the first time in years. The messages started the next day. Some were calm and reflective, almost tender. Others were disappointed, sharp beneath the surface. She said she didn't recognize me anymore, that I'd changed. She was right, but not in the way she meant. Friends I trusted finally heard the full story. A few admitted they'd noticed how carefully I spoke around her, how often I second-guessed myself. One said, "You always sounded like you were bracing for correction." Hearing it out loud was painful. It also made something click. Therapy didn't give me instant clarity. It gave me vocabulary. I talked about the affair, but more about how every disagreement ended with me doubting my reactions. My therapist pointed out how often I described myself using her words. Sensitive, reactive, difficult. When asked if those labels felt true outside the relationship, they didn't. That realization was devastating. It meant I wasn't broken. I'd been adapting. The grief wasn't just a marriage, but for the years I'd spent editing myself down to stay acceptable. When we finally talked about separating, it was oddly calm. She said she hoped one day I'd understand what she'd been trying to teach me, that she wished I were more emotionally evolved. I didn't push back. I told her I needed a relationship where honesty didn't come with prerequisites, and where my feelings weren't treated like problems to solve. She looked disappointed, like I'd failed an important lesson. For the first time, that disappointment didn't move me. If you're reading this and your relationship feels exhausting in a way you can't quite explain, pay attention. Especially if your emotions are constantly being analyzed instead of respected. Love shouldn't require you to disappear to keep things peaceful. Leaving wasn't dramatic or empowering in a cinematic way. It was quiet, frightening, and stabilizing. I didn't walk away because I stopped loving her. I walked away because I started trusting myself again. And if clarity feels like a threat to your relationship, that might already be your answer.